Let's come back to a story that we've been looking at for a number of weeks now, and how we've discovered that around 3 million of you are living in flats that are at best worthless, at worst fire traps. LBC's Rachael Venables has led the field with this one and joins me. We've got more on this, Rachael.
I do, yes, Nick. Good morning. I want to talk to you today about a woman called Leanne. Now, she bought her first home, a flat in one of 2 blocks in Albion Works in central Manchester 3 years ago. But last year, residents there found out their buildings are riddled with fire safety issues. There's timber and foam cladding, polystyrene insulation and wooden balconies, all of which needs stripping out and replacing. But in the meantime, the risks of fire and fire spreading there are so bad, they've just found out they cannot get it insured for a fire.
Our building currently has a level of insurance, but it isn't covered for any fire damage at all. For a couple of weeks, it was actually completely uninsured for anything. So at the moment, myself and my neighbours are terrified as to what this means to us, not being covered with any sort of fire damage. But we're very much aware that if anything happens to our building at the moment, we would still be expected to pay mortgages. We would still be expected to go on as if life was normal with no property.
Now, normally, Nick, when dangerous cladding is found in buildings like this, people do find that their insurance doubles, trebles, in some cases rockets by as much as 10 times higher. But Leanne's home is so dangerous that the old insurer just thought it was too risky and decided not to cover it at all anymore. Meanwhile, the building owner, Artisan H2, say they understand people's concerns and they're working day and night to get full insurance. I've been speaking to Martin Boyd about this. He's chair of the charity Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, and he tells me that he knows of at least 9 other cases, other buildings in this country where this has happened.
If you've not got adequate level of cover, you will be in technical breach of your mortgage terms. Now, the lender's very unlikely to come and foreclose on your mortgage at the moment if you're living in a cladding site on the grounds that the flats aren't actually worth any money. If the insurers have got that nervous about the building, then there has to be a huge question, should people actually be living in it?
And on top of all of this, Nick, the bill to eventually fix Leanne's building is expected to be in the millions of pounds, costs that would likely fall to her and her roughly 100 neighbours. They've applied for the government's £1 billion fund to remove dangerous cladding, but it's first come, first served. And as we've discussed before, by the government's own analysis, it is nowhere near enough money to fix all of the dangerous buildings in this country which actually need it.
Rachael Venables reporting. We'll speak to another victim in just a moment. First, let's get Gavin Jones, who's a chartered fire engineer and who helped with the drafting of the EWS One These Forms process, joins me now. Mr. Jones, what do you see as the solution now, given the number of people who are affected by this?
Hi, Nick. I think the biggest challenge is not knowing, basically, how many of these buildings are affected, how big the challenge is. And I think what we need to ensure is that we use some technology so that the shortage that people have identified in the number of people like myself, chartered engineers, who can go out and inspect these buildings, isn't the thing that stops people from being safe in their buildings or from moving on, getting mortgages, etc. So I've got an idea. I think there are other parties talking about it as well, which is for a national fire safety or building safety database. And basically you'd collect information about the buildings, basic stuff like what's the height of the building, the number of staircases, the cladding materials and so on, so that at least we can understand the scale of the challenge and the costs involved.
Is all cladding dangerous, full stop?
No, absolutely not. I mean, there has been a shift. I mean, the standards seem to we've become kind of less risk tolerant in the last few months. I mean, in January, the government released a new consolidated guidance note, and essentially that raised the bar on safety. So we're looking essentially through a different lens of these buildings. So there are buildings out there which probably have waking watchers in there, probably have their insurance costs higher, when quite frankly they don't need to.
How many buildings are passing this survey process in numbers or percentage terms?
Personally, I can only obviously speak for myself. We're finding that around 80 to 90% of the buildings aren't passing, so they're getting, a requirement for remedial works.
And what happens then? That then obviously blights the tenants in there, or whoever it might be, the people who are living there.
It does. Yeah, so what happens is essentially a valuer goes out in the beginning to see, whether they're willing to lend against a property for mortgage purposes. Then they call us in to have a look at the detail of the building. We'll go through documented information and we'll also visit the premises to undertake some inspections. So we'll look inside the walls, etc. If we find those materials are combustible and unsafe, then what we have to do is we have to look at the remedial solutions that are available. So that will be potentially introducing new cavity barriers, potentially removing material. But the other options are installing...
Okay, in a sentence, how did it get to this size? Why is the problem this magnitude?
We've had blind compliance with guidance, basically. You know, people not truly understanding what the objectives of fire safety were. And, you know, there's a lack of competence in the construction sector. And people have turned a blind eye to safety, and leaseholders are now paying the price.
Gavin Jones, thank you for your time, Gavin. You're a chartered fire engineer. You were involved in the drafting of those forms. Abby, this affects you directly, and we'll be talking with you the other side of the news. We'll also be talking with the National Police Chiefs Council Chairman about the task the police have now in enforcing that rule of 6. 8:31.